In April 1945, the Allies came across many concentration camps and prison sites where thousands of people had been locked up in terrible and awful conditions. Places like Bergen-Belsen and Dachau became infamous, and what the liberators of these camps found haunted them for the rest of their lives. They came across thousands of unburied bodies, corpses just dumped inside of train boxcars and in massive piles. Upon seeing this, the Americans, British, Canadian, and Soviet soldiers were horrified, and in the aftermath of these discoveries, there were scores of SS guards, former staff at the camps, who were shot in reprisal and in revenge for the crimes. Many of these SS guards had surrendered, but they, regardless, were still shot. Some individual liberators sought revenge themselves and carried out attacks upon the former guards, but the Allies turned a blind eye to this, and few were ever brought to trial for the actions of shooting SS guards of the concentration camps. But why did the Allied soldiers do this? As many Allied units advanced into Germany and German-held territories, they were prepared for battle with a weakened enemy, which was on the retreat, and they were not prepared for finding extermination and concentration camps, and they were also not prepared to liberate these places. Intelligence reports about the camps were known at high-level command, but ordinary soldiers did not know what they were about to come across and encounter. They found huge sites in which thousands of people had been left to die and succumb to their fate, and they discovered how terrible these places truly were. They found execution walls and structures. They discovered crematoria with bodies piled near to the ovens ready to be burned, and they found evidence of torture and systematic brutality. Many soldiers recorded that they'd never seen anything comparable, and these were battle-hardened men, some who had fought for years and seen the hardest days of the Second World War. Also found were thousands of starving prisoners and inmates who looked like walking skeletons. One British reporter inside of Bergen-Belsen summed up the feeling, and he said that, I quote, "Here over an acre of ground lay dead and dying people. You could not see which was which. The living lay with their heads against the corpses, and around them moved the awful ghostly procession of emaciated, aimless people, with nothing to do and with no hope of life, unable to move out of your way, unable to look at the terrible sights around them. This day at Belsen was the most horrible of my life." But as mentioned, shortly after some of these camps were liberated, the shooting and reprisals began. Now soldiers who found these sites were disgusted, and they felt incredibly angry at their enemy. The anger they felt led to revenge attacks, and they wanted to seek immediate reprisal and justice for the victims of the crimes. Those who encountered this justice were the SS guards of the camps, some of those who were actually hiding inside of the prisoner population. With this, they were quickly dealt with and were shot. One man who carried out some attacks like this inside of Dachau was Lieutenant William P. Walsh, the commander of Company I of the 157th Infantry of the US Army. Upon seeing the bodies of thousands of emaciated prisoners piled inside of train boxcars, Walsh, who was incredibly angry and emotional, took this out on 4 German soldiers who had surrendered to him. The 4 Germans were shot by Walsh, and then a private, Albert C. Pruitt, administered a coup de grace gunshot to the head of these men, who had been wounded. Walsh, along with another lieutenant, then organised the captured guards and separated them from Wehrmacht or army troops and SS guards. The SS were marched into an enclosure and were then shot by members of I Company with different weapons. The legal status of the SS guards was also cast into question at the time of liberation. The Waffen-SS and the Totenkopfverbände, as in the Death Heads units, who ran the camps, were not considered ordinary army soldiers. These men had long lists of massacres and atrocities, from the shooting of Allied prisoners of war and partisans to shooting thousands upon death marches from one camp to another. Because they had heard about these actions, many frontline soldiers viewed the camp guards not as lawful enemy combatants, but as personnel who were directly responsible for the murder of civilians, and this led to a psychological barrier for them being removed, meaning they thought they wouldn't be punished for retaliating. The Allied forces were also infuriated further by the fact many of the guards who remained at the camp removed their uniforms and tried to mix in with prisoners. Some claimed to be administrative staff or even cooks, and this deception and disguise angered many. Some prisoners pointed out the most brutal guards, leading to an on-the-spot shooting, and soldiers believed they were preventing the escape of war criminals. Another thing the liberators had to contend with was that many of the guards were actually hostile to them, and they did not give over the camp without a fight. It was said upon the liberation of Dachau that, and I quote, "At noon on Sunday the camp was quiet, and the SS guards were at their posts in the towers, when the cry, 'Americans!' went up. A prisoner rushed towards a gate, and a guard shot him. Outside, a single American soldier stood looking casually at the towers while the guards eyed him and others who were 200 or 300 yards away. When the Americans opened fire, the guards in the gate tower came down, hands in the air. One held a pistol behind his back, and the first American shot him." Inside of Watchtower B at Dachau and around this, there were a number of shot SS guards who were armed and who did not want to give up the site to the Allies. So because of this there was a shootout, but these men were quickly overpowered. Specifically, the shooting of SS guards was more common at some sites than others. Dachau's liberation became infamous for the discovery of the camp, but also for the shooting of guards that came after. The most notorious incident of this involved a group of SS guards rounded up inside of a coal yard. They were stood against a wall in a large group, and they were guarded by a machine gunner team. A young soldier turned this weapon onto the men as they were allegedly attempting to escape and run off, and this resulted in about 12 of the prisoners being shot and several more being wounded. It was said by the commander in charge at the time that, I quote, "It was the foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being a more accurate figure." Inside Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, the cleanup of the site took days, and there were accounts of some SS guards attempting to escape. They had been ordered to bury the thousands of bodies around the site in mass graves, and during the cleanup, they tried to make a run for it. The men guarding the SS at the time then just turned their weapons on these men and then shot, bringing their lives to an end. Rather than run after them or go after them, they decided to attack. This may have also been partly motivated by anger and revenge. Another thing to consider is that the Allied liberators and soldiers may not have shot and killed the majority of the guards themselves. They may have lent their weapons to prisoners to get some revenge of their own, and they did also turn a blind eye to the killings conducted by the prisoners. It was said of one incident at Dachau that, and I quote, "Prisoners swarmed over the wire and grabbed the Americans and lifted them to their shoulders. Other prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed 1 or 2 prisoners out of his way, but the courage of the prisoners mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they were stomped or what, but they were killed." It was said in another incident that an inmate was seen stomping an SS man's face until there wasn't much left. The bigger revenge may have been enacted by the prisoners directly, but what made a difference was the fact that the liberating soldiers were armed. 3 former prisoners of Dachau also left the camp during liberation and found one of the worst SS guards hiding in a barn nearby, and he was then beaten to death. Inside Oederhof, these liberation reprisals also occurred, and some soldiers gave their weapons to prisoners to finish off their former guards. By 1945, Allied soldiers had fought through Normandy, the Ardennes and the Rhineland, and had taken casualties from German defensive ambushes. They had also seen forced labour factories and the massacre of civilians inside different lands, but many soldiers began to encounter trouble distinguishing between the rules of war and retributive justice. The official policy for Allied armies was for the SS personnel to be arrested, for evidence of their actions to be collected, and for crimes to be preserved, and then for war crimes trials to be conducted. But in reality, in the heat of the moment and in the chaotic final months of the war, there may have been a breakdown of the German surrender protocol, and coupled with the overwhelming emotional shock felt by the soldiers, they themselves just shot surrendered SS men. Commanders often didn't punish soldiers involved in camp guard shootings either. So, to finish, captured concentration camp guards were sometimes shot because liberating soldiers encountered unprecedented evidence of systematic mass murder and evil crimes conducted by the SS guards. They considered these men and women to be direct perpetrators of these crimes, and the liberators acted under emotional shock after prolonged combat. The act of shooting captured SS guards was never official Allied policy, but it did occur multiple times in the spring of 1945, in the final days of the Second World War. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting. If you have, maybe subscribe. Thanks again for giving your time to watch this video.